Mr. President.
The Senator for Texas.
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President. Speaker Pelosi's second bite at the apple, just after we voted on a $900 billion bill that's now been signed into law by the President of the United States, is not the way to send relief to the hardest hit Americans. Under this legislation, a family of 5 with an annual income of $350,000 would receive a stimulus check. This is reminiscent of the HEROES Act that the House passed, which cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires. This isn't about helping the people that need it the most. This is about helping millionaires and billionaires and people who, frankly, have not suffered the hardship economically that others have during this pandemic. The median household in my state is $60,000, and the Speaker wants to send taxpayer-funded assistance to folks earning nearly 6 times that much. Even the Washington Post editorial board agrees this is bad policy. And it doesn't differentiate between people who've been receiving a paycheck during this pandemic, like government employees, and people who simply by virtue of their job have been put out of work and not receiving any income or maybe at best unemployment compensation. The Speaker's bill isn't about targeting folks who've lost their jobs or seen their income reduced. It's a far cry from the additional assistance President Trump requested for the hardest hit Americans. The reality is this bill would spend roughly $300 billion more on folks who aren't even experiencing a financial strain from the pandemic. We need to focus on the people who've been hurt. That's what our COVID-19 relief bill that was just recently signed into law is designed to do, and I dare say this is not going to be the last time we visit this topic. If there's more we need to do, I'm confident we will do it. But today and this way is not the right way to do it. I object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard. The Senator for Illinois.
Mr. President, I've listened carefully and watched 3 occasions on the floor of the Senate this afternoon where Senator Schumer, Senator Sanders, and Senator Markey have tried to create an opportunity where the Senate would actually come together and vote, where the Senate might make a decision based on the merits of this issue rather than to keep talking around the issue. What is at stake is a substantial sum of money for families which are in the midst of the struggle of their lives. $2,000, characterized a few moments ago by my friend from Texas as Speaker Pelosi's idea. Well, I might remind him it was also Donald Trump's idea, and still is. And the President has told us this morning that we should move on this as quickly as possible, and though I don't often come to the floor to agree with the President, he's right. In this instance, he's clearly right. And what will we do now? We are calling senators back together in Washington from far reaches across the United States. This morning, I received some email and text messages from some of our colleagues hopping on airplanes at 6 a.m. on the West Coast, heading out here to face a vote. What is this vote all about? Well, first is to override the veto of the President when it comes to the defense authorization bill. This was certainly something that was occasioned by one senator, the junior senator from Kentucky, who forced us into a position where that vote needed to be taken here. It could have been handled much more efficiently and to the benefit of all members if it was scheduled for the weekend when we were resuming the new session of Congress. But he insisted, and we're returning and frankly putting in peril, again, in the midst of a pandemic, members of the Senate who are traveling from all far-flung reaches of this country to be part of this action in Washington. But it isn't just the junior senator from Kentucky who is having us sit here in Washington and wait for things that could be taken care of with dispatch. It is a senior senator from Kentucky as well. He has decided that we will not get a vote on the House measure to increase the payments to $2,000 a year. Make no mistake, there is only one way to bring this relief to the families of America. It is to pass the bill already enacted by the House of Representatives. A bill which received 44 Republican votes in addition to a substantial number of Democrats, only 2 voting no. 44 Republican votes joined with the Democrats to call for this measure, which many are decrying on the floor here as class struggle or whatever their argument might be. There is no other measure, including Senator McConnell's alternative, which has any ghost of a chance to help the families of this country with this $2,000 benefit. The only thing that will do it, the only one thing that will do it, is this bill that has already passed the House of Representatives. The House is in recess. When they're going to return is uncertain. They certainly don't have the time to work through the regular order of business and consider any new legislation, even if we could send it to them in time, which I believe is very doubtful. And so it's up to Senator McConnell to decide right here and now. Are we going to come together as a Senate this afternoon, 5 o'clock, when we're supposed to be back and voting, and get this matter done? Bring it to the Senate for a vote. Let's have this vote up or down. Let the Democrats and Republicans express their will on behalf of the families of this country. I couldn't agree more with the senator from Massachusetts and his characterization of what families face across this country, and certainly in my home state of Illinois. I just wonder if any of the Republican senators who are downplaying this economic crisis facing these families have really looked into the issue. This morning in the senator's home state of Texas, they showed an early morning television show of the cars that were lining up for food banks. Long lines of people waiting for food banks. And they interviewed some of them in Texas who told heartbreaking stories of how they once were volunteers at the same food bank and now were dependent on it for a helping hand if they were going to be able to feed their families. These were people who were not lazy at all. Misfortune has come their way, and the question is, will we help? This is our opportunity today with the measure that passed the House of Representatives, not some theory of some legislation might be considered tomorrow. Today, let's have this vote today, this evening. When the senators have returned, let's determine whether or not this House-passed measure for $2,000 is going to be enacted into law and sent to the president, who is clearly anxious to sign it. That, to me, is the reasonable thing to do. In fact, it may even sound like the United States Senate taking a vote on a timely issue after a debate. We do it so seldom around here. I think we've lost our muscle memory when it comes to this activity in the Senate. It's time to return to it. I thank the senator from Vermont, the senator from Massachusetts, and of course the Democratic leader for bringing this issue before us this afternoon. But it shouldn't end with our great speeches. It ought to end with an important vote for the people of this country.
President, would the senator from Illinois yield for a question?
Happy to yield.
The senator for Texas.
Mr. President, I wonder if the senator from Illinois would consider pairing their request for a $2,000 direct payment with a liability shield provision that would guard businesses that have been operating in good faith and following the guidelines put out by public health and government institutions, and preserve a right to sue for reckless and willful disregard of the rights for others. Would the senator consider pairing those two together?
I would say, in response to my colleague, I know his passionate defense of the notion for immunity from liability for corporations in America. He has introduced a lengthy bill on the subject. I don't believe that is consistent with keeping this nation safe during a pandemic, and certainly is not responsive to any onslaught of lawsuits. The senator might be interested to know that the number of medical malpractice cases filed in the name of COVID-19 since the onset of this current pandemic is slightly higher than the total number of lawsuits filed by Donald Trump in protesting the results of November 3rd election. This is not a tsunami of lawsuits. I believe we can take reasonable measures to support and defend those corporations and companies which are making a good faith effort to comply with public health standards and protect their employees and customers. His bill, I'm afraid, goes way too far.
Mr. President.
The senator for Vermont.
Let me concur with my friend from Illinois on the issue. And I have a question for my colleague from Texas. Very simple question. You are concerned about the issue of corporate liability. I get that. I happen not to agree with you. You're entitled to your opinion. You may or may not be concerned about Section 230 of the 1996 Federal Telecommunications Bill. That's fine, too. We may have a discussion about how we protect American democracy. It's a good discussion as well. But I have the strong feeling, Senator Cornyn, that in Texas, as in Vermont, you know what? People are really not talking about corporate liability. It's a good issue. It's an important issue. I don't think they're talking about Section 230. What I think they are talking about, as the senator from Illinois just said, how they're going to feed their kids today. That is the issue. And what I would ask my friend from Texas is, what is your problem with allowing the Senate to vote on whether or not we are going to allow Americans, working class people, to get a $2,000 check? Now, I gather that when that vote comes to the floor, and I hope it comes immediately, you'll vote no. And you'll explain to the people of Texas why you voted that way. That's called democracy. I respect that. But what is your problem with allowing the Senate to have a freestanding vote? There are a number of people on your side, Republicans, who have already come forward and say, yeah, they want to vote for this $2,000 check. Now, if you want to deal with corporate liability, that's fine. Let's deal with it at some point. Bring forth a bill. We can vote on it up or down. All that we are asking for is a simple up or down vote on the issue that tens of millions of people are talking about right now. Will they survive economically in the midst of this terrible pandemic? So I ask my colleague from Texas, what is the problem with allowing the U.S. Senate to vote on the bill passed by the House? And I yield to my colleague from Texas.
Mr. President.
The senator for Texas.
Mr. President, I would say to our colleague from Vermont, I have no problem with providing assistance, whether it's to public health officials who are trying to struggle with this pandemic, or to provide money for the research for therapeutics or vaccine, which fortunately is now being distributed around the country. I have no objection to direct payments to individuals. I voted for the $1,200 direct payment contained in the CARES Act. I voted for the additional money that's provided for in the most recent COVID-19 legislation. But this legislation that the senator from Vermont is advocating would benefit households with annual income over $350,000. They would get this money. And I would say that one way to deal with this, because of course we negotiated back and forth on the last COVID-19 bill, nobody got everything they wanted, but if our colleagues on the other side of the aisle want an additional financial benefit to people making up to $350,000, why not couple it with liability protection for people who are acting in good faith? This isn't just about corporations, and our colleagues across the aisle know it. This is about schools. This is about churches, synagogues, mosques. This is about every business that's worried that a game of gotcha is going to take place and they're going to end up paying the price. Even if they win the lawsuit, they will not be able to. They're still going to have to pay for the costs of defense, potentially losing their business outright.
All right, if I could,
the senator from Texas has the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So clearly, our colleagues across the aisle care more about trial lawyers and being able to bring litigation against businesses that have tried to do their best but have struggled dealing with the evolving public health guidance provided by the CDC and other authorities. Clearly, if they're not interested in engaging in a negotiation where people who, through no fault of their own, find themselves victimized by frivolous litigation, then we'd have no alternative but to continue to object to this request.
President,
The senator for Vermont.
If you listen carefully, you understood that my friend from Texas did not answer my question. He has a concern about corporate liability. It's a legitimate debate. You know what? Bring it to the floor. Let's vote it up or down. I will vote against it. You will vote for it. But I asked you a very simple question, not linking things together. Nobody in the real world understands that stuff. That's inside the Beltway stuff. What people in the real world know, and I want to take a moment to read some of these statements, because we have a lot of people on our social media, and we asked the American people, just the other day, we said, tell me, what would a $2,000 check mean to you? What's going on in your lives? And in just over 24 hours, I would say to my friend from Texas, nearly 6,000 people responded. And here is just what a few of them had to say. And we don't have, this is Twitter stuff, so I don't have their names here, and I wouldn't use it publicly anyhow, but this is what they say. One person writes, $2,000 is the difference between keeping our apartment and being evicted. Here's another. $2,000 means I can afford to feed my 3 kids. Another response, quote, it would mean not having to choose between rent and groceries or not having to ration my partner's meds, end quote. Another response, quote, I am raising my grandson with medical needs. I am $4,000 behind on utilities. We need electricity to run his medical equipment, end quote. Here's another response. $2,000 would mean I wouldn't have to worry about making my mortgage payment this month and that I could get my medication, end quote. Another response, $2,000 would mean paying my rent and getting life-saving treatment because I can't afford the $50 copay through my work insurance just to see my neurologist right now, end of quote. And on and on and on. Thousands of people responding. So I want to get back to the point, and I want to again ask my friend from Texas. You got a concern about corporate liability? Good issue. Bring it to the floor. Let's vote on corporate liability. I would yield for a question from my friend from Illinois.
Yield for a question through the chair. I've listened to the figures that have been used on the floor about families that could qualify for the $2,000. It's my understanding that an individual with an income of $75,000 or less could qualify for the $2,000 payment, and a joint return, husband and wife, $2,000 could be given to them if their income is under $150,000. Is that your understanding?
Understanding. And I think, you know, as Republicans do, they're going to, well, let it be. But I'll get back to my friend from Texas, Senator Cornyn. We're asking a simple question. You want to bring up corporate liability? Bring it up. You want to bring up Section 230? Bring it up. You want to bring up the man on the moon? Bring it up. But what the American people want now is an up or down vote. Now, you're going to vote against it if it comes to the floor. That's fine. It's your right. Explain it to the people of Texas. I will vote for it. But all that I am asking for is the right as a United States Senator to have the vote. And again, I ask you, what is your problem with members of the United States Senate, including a number of Republicans who have already indicated they would like to vote for this? What's your problem with bringing that up as a single standalone bill, not merged with corporate liability or anything else? What's your problem with that?
Mr. President.
Senator for Texas.
Mr. President, I would say to our colleague from Vermont, this money is not targeted to people who suffered financial losses. It is not targeted to people who suffered financial losses. This money would go to members of your own staff if they meet the financial requirements, other government employees who've suffered no financial loss during this pandemic. We've all suffered in different ways during the pandemic, to be sure, but financially, this money is designed to help the people who need it the most. Why would you send money to government employees that have been receiving their full paycheck during this pandemic?
That's a good question, and then I will have to explain that to the people of the state of Vermont.
The Senator for Texas has the floor.
He asked me a question as I understood it.
The Senator for Texas.
John, did you ask me a question? Did I?
The Senator for Texas.
It was more of a rhetorical question, Mr. President.
The Senator for Texas.
Mr. President, I wanted to come to the floor and talk about what strikes me as something akin to Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day isn't only the day I was born, it's something I feel like we're living through here as we debate the same points over and over and over again, forgetting what it is we've already done, the good things we've done together on a bipartisan basis. We've already appropriated roughly $4 trillion in response to this pandemic, and it's appropriate that we have done so because this was a true public health crisis. But now this is we're seeing politics creep back in an attempt to send money to people who've suffered no financial loss in an untargeted and wasteful sort of way. These relief packages that we passed together have provided hundreds of billions of dollars to support our hospitals and healthcare workers who are on the front lines. And I voted for it, and I think we were right to do so. We've thrown small businesses and their employees a lifeline through the Paycheck Protection Program, and we were right to do so. We've invested in research and development, manufacturing of therapeutics and vaccines that are currently being administered, thank goodness, throughout the country and indeed around the world. And we sent unprecedented assistance to workers, families, and individuals whose livelihoods have been upended by this crisis. Thanks to President Trump's leadership, Congress has stepped up and met this unprecedented challenge to deliver relief bill after relief bill for the American people. If you had told me a year ago I would have voted this year alone for roughly $4 trillion worth of spending in this pandemic, I would not have believed you. But I do believe this is the domestic equivalent to World War II, where we have to do everything humanly possible to try to help our fellow man, woman, and child during this pandemic. The latest round of relief came, of course, just this week when President Trump signed the $900 billion rescue package into law. While I'm glad Congress was able to send more relief out the door at the end of the year, I'm disappointed that it took so long to do so. It's amazing the sense of urgency our Democratic colleagues have today, since at least 3 times, maybe 4 times, they blocked our attempts to pass $500 billion relief bills during the course of the summer. In July, our colleagues introduced the HEALS Act, which would have provided just under $1 trillion in relief, covering the same types of policies included in the most recent relief bill: direct payments, unemployment benefits, funding for schools, vaccine, and a host of other priorities. Our Democratic colleagues not only complained about the bill, they called it weak, little, pathetic, and unserious, but they refused to engage in the sort of negotiations that are customary around here when you actually want to solve a problem, or consider anything short of the House's multi-trillion-dollar bill, which they knew had no chance of passing in the Senate because of things like tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, which had nothing to do with COVID. So our Democratic colleagues dragged their feet. July, August, September, October, November. Months went by and the cases soared and the economic squeeze tightened, and our Democratic colleagues refused to accept any sort of compromise. That was until a few weeks ago when they finally changed their tune right after the election. I'm sure it comes as no surprise that once the holdout agrees to negotiate, things can move pretty quickly. And that's what happened here after the election. Democrats, Republicans, and the administration agreed to a $900 billion package, which looks very similar to the one they dubbed pathetic just a few months ago. In recent days, the president has expressed an interest in doing more. And I have no doubt that we will do more in this area. But Speaker Pelosi's bill goes far beyond what the president is talking about. For one, it would dramatically widen the pool of recipients, enabling wealthy households to qualify for relief checks. This is unacceptable and wasteful. When Congress provided the first round of direct payments through the CARES Act, we did so in a way that sent relief to the hardest hit Americans. Individuals who made up to $75,000 received the full $1,200. And the amount gradually declined as income increased and completely phased out at $99,000. We kept the same formula for the $600 payments provided for under the omnibus and further targeted the relief. Once again, those who made up to $75,000 will receive the full amount, and the amount phases out completely at $87,000. Under the CARES Act, a family of 4 earning up to $150,000 received $3,400. In the most recent rescue bill, the same family would receive an additional $2,400. This was the most effective and targeted way to ensure that assistance goes to those who actually need it, while avoiding sending taxpayer dollars, borrowed, I might add, to those who don't. The House-passed legislation would provide $2,000 payments, but it doesn't have a similar structure to keep these payments targeted. Let me give you an example. If this bill were to become law, a person making $100,000 a year would receive a $750 check from the federal government, whether or not they lost income during the pandemic. This isn't someone who used to make that much but was laid off or had a reduction in their income. Someone who's currently earning a 6-figure salary would receive an additional $750 from American taxpayers. For families, the income barrier goes higher. As I mentioned a moment ago, if you have a family of 5 with an annual household income of $350,000 a year, that family would receive a stimulus check under the House-passed bill. Now, that's not being smart with taxpayer dollars, and that's not targeted at the people who actually need it. That's a giveaway to people who have not suffered any financial losses during this pandemic, and clearly not targeted at those who need the most help. I mentioned a moment ago that the median income for households in Texas is $60,000 a year. So this family of 5 is earning nearly 6 times as much and would still receive a check from taxpayers. That defies all common sense. Even the Washington Post editorial board dubbed this policy as wasteful because of the huge amounts destined for what they call perfectly comfortable families, close quote. Even though Congress has already provided roughly $4 trillion in relief to the American people, our Democratic colleagues are acting as though this is the first and only way to help our country. Like I said, for them, every day is Groundhog Day. They ignored everything we've done in the past and act like this is the only thing we have or could do. It's just not true. This debate isn't about whether or not Congress should help families who are struggling. We have, and there's no question we'll continue to do so where needed. That's why we provided $1,200 in direct payments to the hardest hit Americans through the CARES Act and an additional $600 through the most recent relief bill. That's why these bills also bolstered state unemployment benefits and expanded them to include independent contractors and self-employed. That's why Congress has passed legislation to provide food assistance to families, keep more hardworking Americans on the payroll, and ensure our economy is on track for a strong recovery. Again, we did this thanks to the leadership of President Trump and by working together in a bipartisan way. Countless Texans have told me about the impact of this relief on their businesses and their families, and we can't lose sight of the progress that has already been made. But future relief must be targeted. We need to support those who need it and avoid sending hundreds of billions of dollars, as this proposal would, to those who don't need it. Throughout the year, I've been an advocate for an incremental approach to these relief bills because I think it's hard to spend $3 trillion and know exactly how that bill is going to work. And indeed, we found out through the CARES Act that the Main Street lending facility, which we funded at roughly $500 billion, it wasn't as useful as we would have hoped. Conversely, the Paycheck Protection Program was more successful than our wildest dreams. And so I think by seeing what works and what doesn't work, we can be better stewards of the taxpayer dollars by spending the money more efficiently and in a more targeted way. This isn't like highway bills or farm bills or defense spending bills where we have an idea about what's needed for individual programs. There was no precedent for this pandemic, no handbook, no clear way to gauge how long this crisis would go on or what would be needed to sustain our response. After the CARES Act passed, we knew it made the most sense to hit the pause button and see what worked well, what didn't, and where more help was needed. As I said, there were certain programs like the Paycheck Protection Program that almost immediately dried up. If I'm not mistaken, in 2 weeks, roughly $350 billion was obligated under the Paycheck Protection Program, a strong indication that we really hit the sweet spot when it came to helping those small businesses. And that's why we added more funding in April, another $320 billion. And we extended the program in July and reinvested in the Paycheck Protection Program again in the omnibus. As I said, there were other places where the money went unspent, but fortunately in the most recent bill, we were able to repurpose hundreds of billions of dollars in unspent funds, again, to target it to where the need was greatest, where it could help the most. There's no question that tens of millions of workers and their families have been hurt by this virus. We all know that. And I think we've all acted together, by and large, responsibly in trying to respond to that. No one will be left out if we have a means and method of targeting this to those people, whether it's direct payments, enhanced unemployment benefits, incentives to their employer to maintain them on payroll. And now that we have the beginning of the distribution of the vaccine, my hope is that in the coming months, we will get back to, if not the new normal, whatever the next normal will be. But we're just a few days from kicking off a new Congress, and I have no reason to believe that our coronavirus relief work is finished here today. As a matter of fact, Vice President Biden said he expects to send us an additional request for help once he assumes office. Once the legislation we have passed has a chance to benefit the American people, we'll see if more relief is needed, and then, if it is needed, we should absolutely do more. I still believe in the wisdom of the incremental approach, and I believe our Democrat friends will join us in responding to true needs of this crisis without month-long delays or irresponsible spending. Countless Texans have told me about the importance of the relief that we provided through direct payments, unemployment benefits, food assistance, and other forms of support by the laws we passed throughout this year. I was proud to support each of these policies, which have eased the financial strains on millions of Texans and other Americans, and will continue to work with my colleagues to provide assistance as our war on COVID-19 rages on. Mr. President, I yield the floor.